Man, huge thanks to Zac for visiting. Zac trains top soccer players. He's known for incredible knee rehab. He's been doing ATG for how long? OG days.
2019, yeah, the early days.
2019. Amazing. Zac runs our online soccer programs for ATG. You can also find him for in-person training, for more detailed training. Can't recommend enough reaching out to him if you're in the soccer space. He's going to work with you one-on-one right now with his best tips.
All right, guys, so we're going to be talking about some of the ATG principles today and how we can apply that for soccer specifically, like why we want to use some of these things. So Ben asked me to talk about, when we're looking at some of this stuff, what is the single most important thing that I could convey for soccer players specifically? If there's one thing that we could bring into the soccer training world that's not there right now, what's that kind of one big idea? And so there's a few things that I was debating about. That ground up idea, something that's really important, right? We really want strong feet, strong ankles. That's going to help with performance, help with injury production, all of these things. But when it comes to the one thing that I think is most important that's not there currently, it's that idea of strength through length, or that end range strength training, where we're really trying to get into some of these deeper ranges of motion, some of these kind of loaded stretching type ideas, and the benefits that we're going to get out of that we're not getting from some of our more just kind of regular training protocols. And so the two main benefits that I think we get out of that, obviously, is the mobility component, right? When we're taking these weights into some of these end ranges, we're able to improve our mobility, able to move better. But I also think that there's a structural kind of connective tissue component that has really good carryover for athleticism, moving better, being a better athlete, as well as the injury prevention side of things that can really, really think help all of you guys in the football world be better athletes, play better, have less injuries. So with the mobility piece specifically, to me, there's just no disadvantage to having access to more options, to being more flexible, just to being able to be cold and actually display some decent level flexibility is something that, to me, just doesn't seem something that's not going to be beneficial as an athlete. And now some people will say, yes, well, I'm not going to get into some of these deep end ranges in the middle of a game when I'm playing. But a concept that I think is really useful is that by increasing our end range, increasing the amount of movement that I have access to, it makes all of the ranges below that easier to get into. So it's a little bit smoother. If I can palm the floor comfortably cold, well then I can snap down into this position really comfortably. And I think back to guys like Zlatan, that big kind of famous touch where he's bringing the ball down out of the air. That's not his end range that he's getting into. He's even more flexible than that. But by having access to that, he can smoothly enough get up there that he can get there with control and actually use that range of motion. And so the more we open up possibilities, the more it makes everything within that circle, gives us access to more things. And so we can apply this concept to all the different areas of the body, but I think for football, for soccer specifically, the hips are something that is super, super important. Can we get some length, some mobility, and some strength into these areas? And so when we think about ATG, when you think about long range stuff, yes, we think about the split squat, and that's one component of it, but there's four real moves or four directions that I think about when it comes to hip mobility. We have forward and backwards, the hip flexors, then we have the back, the hamstrings, but then we also have side to side, getting into the outside and then inside the groin for that hip. So I want to show kind of the four main moves that will give you access to each of those four kind of corners or directions of the hip. And I bet that if you're able to kind of over time improve your capacity to do each of these movements, you're going to have a lot more flexible, mobile, strong hips. So the first one that I like to get into is for that hamstring. So for that posterior chain is that Jefferson curl. So it's essentially just taking a weight and it's a loaded stretch where we're essentially trying to touch our toes with the weight, letting this hang, rounding the back as much as we can, trying to move each individual vertebrae one at a time. If you get down here, you can tuck the arms a little bit so that way there's still tension down here in the bottom, or you can use our super handy boxes to hang this off. But by taking weight into this end range position, it allows you to get deeper than if you were just stretching by yourself. But now by taking weight in here, we're also getting stronger. So I really like this concept of strength through length or loaded mobility, where we get stronger and more flexible at the same time. The weight allows us to increase our range of motion. The increased load allows us to get stronger. And so this is a great way to really open up the hamstrings, the posterior chain, as well as the lower back. And so you can start something very light, just using a light weight, legs are straight. If you need to, if you're super, super tight, you can even unlock the knees to start off with, just to make it a little bit more accessible. As that gets easier, then we can start to load more, and if you really want to be mean, you can elevate the toes a little bit. That's really going to pick on and dig into those hamstrings, and then same idea. Now can we lock the knees out, tuck the chin, big, big, big stretch here. And this, along with that split squat, is really one of the movements that took me from literally being known as one of like the stiffest guys on my college soccer team to now just being able to comfortably palm the floor for fun. And it's something that can help open up that mobility as well as give us kind of stronger hamstrings, help prevent some of those hamstring injuries. So that's backwards. Then we also want to go to the sides next. So that next one is some variation of a pigeon stretch where we can get into kind of that piriformis, that outer hip here. So if we're starting, I like to actually incline a bench a little bit. The more the incline, the easier it's going to be to get into. And we're going to be at roughly that 90 degrees, hop that guy back, and now you can play with the angles, but we're just reaching our chest towards our knee, seeing can we get into that outer hip out here. And if we're just starting, we can just hold here just for a stretch. Or as we get more advanced, we can start to lower the bench a little bit, increase the stretch, and actually use our body weight to pull ourselves or kind of load this position. So start, you can use the hands just to assist yourself getting in here. But as that gets easier and easier, now I'm actually loading this tissue and pressing out of it. So I'm using my body weight to get a little bit of, again, that idea of that loaded stretch. So I'm pulling myself into this position, pressing out with that hip, and it's a fantastic way to get into that kind of outside hip capsule, really open that guy up a little bit for some of that more lateral kind of side to side. Then let's go pancake over here. You mind if I steal these cables?
Table pancake?
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with that one.
Dude, I know, it's so good. Every time I come back to it, I'm like, yeah, I need to do this one more.
Makes it so simple.
Yeah, it's so.
Such a difficult area.
Next one that we're going to get into is one that you tend to see a lot of guys in particular, but a lot of our soccer guys be a lot tighter in. And that's much more of that kind of groin, adductor, kind of inner thigh area. This is one we also see lots of little nagging kind of tweaks, pulls, and just tend to linger and be really uncomfortable when it comes to playing. And so this is one that I think opening up that kind of inner range, that groin, is something that can be very, very useful. And so we can start standing, getting into some stretches down here, but I really like variations of this pancake stretch, where we're just sitting down on the floor, spread the feet as wide as you can, and now we're just starting to try and reach our forward, reach our chest for the floor. Now this is someone that a lot of people kind of just starting out are going to be fairly tight in. This might not even be something that you can access straight away. You're just so tight that I almost can't reach forward, can't get a stretch. And so when we're starting there, starting by elevating your hips can actually be a nice entry point. So the more you kind of raise your hips off the floor, makes this just a little bit friendlier, a little bit more accessible, so that way we can start to train it, start to open up some of these ranges. A trick that I like with that as well is if you can add a weight, a kettlebell, something in front of you that you can kind of anchor yourself with, almost pull yourself a little bit deeper into that position. And again, if we're starting off, we can just go static for time, trying to relax, trying to force, not to force this, trying to breathe, just get this to open up. As this gets more comfortable, we can go maybe a little bit more dynamic, pulling ourselves into this position, using our body weight to, again, get a little bit of load that I'm now trying to pull myself out of, or a more kind of advanced progression, or one that I find is helpful for kind of bigger guys in particular that need a little bit extra weight to help them get into this stretch, is this kind of loaded pancake variation, where you can use a cable stack and allow the weight to help pull you deeper into that stretch. And then again, now I'm trying to use those same muscles to pull myself out. So I'm being intentional here of trying to pull myself into the bottom and then boom, using that weight to pull myself out. So again, I'm getting that little bit of load at some of these end range positions. And so then of course, saving the best for last one we want to look at is that ATG split squat, because it's so effective, not just for kind of loading, strengthening, protecting that knee, but that back leg, we get a fantastic stretch, loaded stretch into that hip flexor. So when I'm getting into this end range down here, yes, I want that full bend in the knee, but now can we also start to think about this back leg? Down here, easy, as I straighten this, all of a sudden now there's a ton of pulling on that hip flexor right there. And again, it's a stretch, but now it's also supporting my body weight. So I'm getting stronger here as well as getting more flexible. So when you're starting, elevate the bench as much as you need to. Support yourself, support some of your weight with your hands. I care about range of motion first. Can we just get access to each of these positions? Be patient with this, we're not in a rush to load it. Can we get access first to some of these end ranges of motion? Now, as that starts to improve, we can go lower. So the lower we go, the more the stretch is going to be on that back hip flexor. And this is also where we can start to elevate or start to load as well. So taking a little bit of weight into some of these end range positions, but I'm really trying to squeeze that shut down here at the bottom, keeping that back knee off the floor. And now I'm getting a ton of pulling on this hip flexor back here. And so this one I really love, because that hip flexor and groin combo in particular, these are the areas that in soccer tend to get overused so much. We run into just these little kind of niggling, nagging kind of injuries, tweaks that just tend to linger, make things really uncomfortable. And so mastering these two positions, getting access first and then getting strong in some of these end ranges has been so effective for helping clear up some of these kind of chronic hip issues that guys run into, making them kind of more stronger, more flexible kind of overall. Okay. And so then last kind of tip, trick, while we're still on this kind of mobility topic as well, is when we're getting into some of these end ranges and stuff like that, there's a few kind of progressions that I like to think about. I kind of hinted at it here, but first one with all of these, can we just get access, okay? We're not trying to force anything, we're not trying to be a hero, we're not trying to rip anything open. Can we just touch some of these end ranges? Just find where that end range is for you right now. Then be patient, see if we can slowly get that to open up over time. Once we're starting to get a little bit more range, a little bit flexibility, and we're trying to challenge this a little bit more, now it's where we can start to load, yes, but just thinking about applying more pressure into these end ranges of just trying to squeeze some of these positions shut. With this split squat in particular, an example is squeezing the muscle on the opposite side. So when I'm going into the bottom here, I'm gonna stretch this hip flexor, but you'll see if you get a little bit of a squeeze in this glute, so I squeeze this glute a little bit on the back side, all of a sudden you get way more tension in that hip flexor. You're squeezing the antagonist, muscle on the opposite side. Hold that, boom, back out. When I'm going into that Jefferson curl, some sort of a forward fold, can I flex the quads and the abs? And all of a sudden, I get way more tension on that opposite side. So when we're looking to kind of scale the intensity here, one of my favorite little tricks to get into that mobility side of things, just a little bit more, squeeze the muscle on the opposite side of the one you're trying to stretch. You get a way deeper stretch, way more pull, feels fantastic. So then the other big kind of advantage of this technique, this idea of kind of strength through length or end range strength training, is not just the mobility piece. Yes, we get stronger. Yes, we get more flexible. Yes, we get stronger at end range, which I think is very important. We tend to train this mid range a lot, but not training that end range. So it just helps us be a little bit more balanced, a little bit more kind of cohesive as a whole. But I also think that there are distinct benefits from this side of this style of training for the actual joints themselves, for the kind of connective tissue, both within the muscle, the intermuscular connective tissue, and within the joint itself. There is something beneficial from, if we just look at the knees, of this end range of kind of squeezing the knees shut down here that seems to make the actual joints themselves stronger, more robust, more durable, as long as, of course, we're kind of working at a good intensity, we're not pushing through pain and that sort of thing. But there seems to be a very positive kind of stimulus, benefit, adaptation that we get from working these kinds of positions. So then the other idea with this kind of end range strength training, this strength through length, this kind of loaded mobility, is that we're not just gaining access to some of these deeper positions, but we're actually trying to make a kind of structural, physical change within the tissue. We're actually lengthening the muscle and the connective tissue as well. And I think this is the real kind of secret sauce behind this that has such a benefit for kind of injury prevention as well as performance. Is it's not we're just kind of creating neurological relaxation where now I have access to a little bit more range of motion. Like we are actually creating a structural change within the tissue itself that makes it a little bit more permanent. It makes it a little bit stickier, makes it much easier to hang on to versus people that have tried kind of stretching in the past and not quite had success, is you have to just do it over and over and over again. This, once we kind of gain access to some of these positions, becomes a lot easier to maintain this. That's why we're able to palm the floor essentially cold without having to kind of stretch, warm up, and do all of these things. And so that connective tissue component, I think, is really key within all of this. It happens at the muscular level with those split squats that we're getting into. For that end range, we're actually kind of creating length and strength within that hip flexor within the actual muscle tissue itself. But then there's also the joint component that I think is super beneficial. I think this is the real kind of secret sauce behind a lot of the success that the ATG system is getting in general. And this is the biggest thing that I think other people miss. By really trying to kind of squeeze the joint itself closed, it seems to have very beneficial effects for the actual joint itself, the internal stuff, tendons, ligaments, connective tissue, helps it feel better, helps it get stronger over time, more robust over time. And this is the side of things that I think is how we're able to have success with kind of knee injuries in terms of recovery, but then also prevention. And so when we're getting into some of these positions, when we're talking about the knee specifically, yes, we want to get into these end ranges because we strengthen the quads through a range of motion that we maybe haven't trained them in before. We get to strengthen more of that full strength curve, which is very beneficial. But again, there's something about this pressure that we're putting in the joint down here, provided we follow, of course, that most important rule of all, and we're not working through things that are tender, painful, uncomfortable, all right? One of the best things that you can do within the ATG system is scale all of these back. So we can be here, we can regress this with support, or we can progress this and load. But this idea of trying to put pressure and squeeze that joint shut down here, again, seems to have very beneficial effects on strengthening the tendons, circulating synovial fluid so we can strengthen, hydrate, lubricate all of the internal structures within the knee. And so when we're getting into some of these movements, this is, I think, having that intent is, I think, one of the key details that some people miss out on when we're getting into some of these movements. They see an ATG split squat and like, okay, yeah, I want to do that. And we're getting kind of here, stuff like that. We're pressing in and out. So we're getting good mobility. We're getting some range down here in the knee. But for me, if we can have that little bit of intent down here there's a huge difference in a squat on a slant board between squatting here and squatting here, and then pressing straight back up from there. Even though it's a subtle change, even though it's still body weight, the kind of pressure or load that my body is experiencing, that the joints are experiencing, is much greater here. And therefore, again, as long as the intensity is appropriate for where you're at, we therefore get a greater adaptation. And so having that intent is something that I really encourage with people that are either just trying this out or with my athletes that I experience personally, of trying to kind of go after and get that connective tissue adaptation. Because that is the real thing that gives us that kind of long-term, quote, bulletproofing kind of injury prevention perspective, is that we're able to have stronger connective tissue, tendons, ligaments. But what I think is also interesting about this, and some of the kind of genius of the ATG system as well, is Ben always talks about his long-term approach, right? This is something that's we're not trying to be here to kind of get results 2 weeks from now. We're trying to have results 2 years from now. How do we have longevity? How do we have performance that we can always consistently rely on? And part of that, I think, is this emphasis on training the joints through that full range of motion, so that way we can get that connective tissue adaptation. Because if we think about how the kind of the performance side of things work, or physiology works, in a lot of performance spheres, we're very interested on ramping up that CNS, that nervous system output. I want to have more juice, more horsepower, more ability to go. And you see that in the training world. That's so much of what our training is focused on, is can we be more powerful, more explosive? And all that's fantastic. But we also want to have the structural component that goes with that. And the challenge or danger or issue that I think some people run into is that the CNS adapts much faster than our muscle tissue, which also adapts much faster than our connective tissue, the actual joints. So these are the kind of three layers that go into performing or going into a movement, right? Nervous system sends a signal. It's nervous, that signal acts on the muscle tissue, that muscle tissue pulls on the connective tissue. So these are the three systems that we need to have working cohesively if we want to do any sort of movement, if we want to be more explosive. And so yes, in order to have more output, we want a stronger signal going from that CNS. We want to ramp up that horsepower and that connective tissue. But that system adapts so much faster than those joints, tendons, ligaments. Those things barely have a blood supply. They're very slow to heal, recover, and to adapt. And so if we focus all of our training on jacking up the horsepower of our fastest moving system, to me, that's where we're starting to run into issues from a kind of injury or performance perspective, is we just have the horsepower that our body, our joints, our structure can't handle. It's like that example of like putting a race car in a golf cart, or putting a race car engine in a golf cart. We have all of this juice, but we don't have that, the suspension, the tires, the chassis, in order to utilize that effectively. And so with this style of training, where we're trying to focus on the slowest moving variable, on actually getting stronger joints, stronger internal structures, stronger tendons and ligaments, we can be a lot more confident that we're going to be safe, protected, secure as much as possible as we're becoming a better athlete. But it also then allows us to get so much more out of that training. This is kind of like the base of the pyramid, the foundation, that the wider and wider and wider this gets, not necessarily that's going to have a direct improvement of, if you get your ATG split squat to flat ground, that you're not necessarily going to instantly be dunking, but it allows you to have the kind of safety, security to then train for dunking and get that adaptation from that that's gonna make us a better jumper or whatever it is, versus trying to go jump and all of a sudden I have knee pain or something is kind of not developed the same way. So it allows us to, it gives us potential to jump higher, perform better, do all of these things. And when we start to do this over time and we can go from just getting access to this position to now actually kind of loading it, getting strong here, that's when we can really get some of those performance gains as well. So kind of big picture, kind of wrapping all of that up, is one of the ways that I think about kind of classifying these movements of, let's just get access first, and that will help us feel better, okay? Like just perform better, just not have some of those aches and pains, move better. And I think people underestimate how much of a performance boost that actually is. Like just think about in your own personal kind of career, when was the last time that you had a consistent entire season or even just a single game where you truly felt 100%, like you could exert yourself to the fullest of the fullest extent of your ability, where you could really just kind of go all out? How much more athletic, more confident were you able to play just by removing some of those inhibitions? And so at the lowest level, that's what we're trying to do with some of this long range strength stuff. It's just, can we give you access to this so you can feel good, and then boom, you can just go express yourself to the fullest of your ability, and that right there is going to improve your performance right off the bat. But then you want to really get to some of these kind of freakish standards. You want to dunk, you want to sprint, you want to do all of these different things. Like, okay, then let's get strong in these positions with that intent of, can I strengthen the joints? Can I strengthen the connective tissue? Can I get to the point where I can walk up cold and take some 60, 70 pound dumbbells and really try and squeeze this joint shut as much as I possibly can, and then boom, have good leverage, be strong out of the bottom there. When we can have that kind of capacity, it just makes everything else that we're doing so much more effortless. It makes us be able to get a lot more out of it. And so that's kind of the big picture, what I wanted to get at with this concept, why I think it's so important. It's something that very few people are doing in the industry, in kind of the performance world of soccer, and it's something that I think has massive benefits on improving your ability, improving your mobility, your ability to move, feel good within your body, but then also strengthen the joints, the connective tissue, so we can be healthier, stronger, perform better, all of those good things.